I met Anna a couple years ago, and I was formerly here in New York City. I worked at a number of places with a number of clients here in the city. I recently have moved out to San Francisco and joining you today from there. But yeah, so my career kind of took an interesting turn after this situation happened, and I found that a lot of people were reaching out to me to understand a little bit more about culture, community, and inclusion in the workplace. And that's kind of where my side hustle landed with the consulting gig, is helping organizations understand the culture that they're in and move more towards an inclusive and diverse environment within their hiring practices, as well as formulating a testing team. So yeah, a little bit about myself up there. Also, I like to travel. So today is one of those occasions, as well as all over the world, and now it's going to be at conferences and such because of these awesome invites that I keep getting on this topic. So let's discuss it a little bit. Also, I would love for this to be an engaging conversation, so I will ask questions throughout and get people's perspective on a few things. So the language of culture. This is constantly a question at every organization. It's funny, I've done some research about companies that I'm working with, and it always starts on their homepage, right? So I'll go to their website, I'll check out what they're advertising, I'll look at it, I'll see what they're advertising for, who their audience is, and then we'll have a conversation around that. Further into it, when it gets to the hiring process, I talk about the culture that they exist in and what they're aiming at. And the responses are very interesting, and that's kind of what we're going to discuss today, so that we can have maybe a more open perspective of what we are talking about when we advertise ourselves for hire on websites and in the employment portals. So the first question I want to ask is, I want to get a couple people's perspective on culture just in general. Does anyone have like a strong position on what culture means in their workplace?
Culture to me is how we do things around here.
How we do things around here. Okay, that's awesome.
How do we interact with each other?
How do we interact with each other?
I have an issue. I was born in different country,
Okay,
and every time I come to work, they start speaking about the sports, which I don't understand, and 70s, shows that I have no idea about. But a lot of American culture is based on those stories.
right, awesome. Anyone else?
I notice, and this doesn't directly apply to me, but I do notice in many or most tech cultures that there's a bias toward alcohol at events. And so if I am a recovering alcoholic, if I do not drink for religious reasons, that becomes really obvious really quickly in almost every culture I've been in.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. We're actually going to touch on that in just a few moments. But yeah, culture is perceived from everyone in a very different manner, whether it's when you're in another country or your own home life provides you with a different culture in general. When you get into a working environment with other cultures clashing, what does become the culture that you work for? And how is the business advertising for that when they're asking for people to apply or they're trying to gain new talent? So I started the basics. I went on Google and I Googled it. What does culture mean? Came up with these lovely definitions, and quite honestly, I think everyone that responded can support one of these definitions. The one that I thought was the most interesting though, and maybe this is because I'm a science geek on the side, but the biology term and then its origin. And it talks a little bit about the conditions sustainable for growth. And that's an interesting concept because when we think about culture, we think of what already exists in an organization. And we advertise for that. Like what Jess was saying, cultures are built around beer or drinking culture within the tech community especially, right? People go into companies because I know like Google has slides and they have free lunch and all these other attractive things. But what happens if, like you're someone who is a recovering alcoholic? Or what if you don't drink altogether? What if you're a conservative or an introvert? There's a lot of different aspects within the culture that you're advertising for that you might be missing the mark when it comes to talent because of the way that you're advertising for it. So there was already a talk today about the hiring process, so thank you so much, Lauren, for prefacing a lot of what I'm going to talk about on this slide. But thinking on how we are hiring, Let me get a question that was already asked. Lauren asked it. Who has hired in the last 6 months? Okay. Who is hiring in the next 6 months? Awesome. So just a quick question. Where are you getting your candidates from?
LinkedIn,
LinkedIn,
career site.
word of mouth, internal recruiting? Okay, awesome. Work referrals? Some of the clients that I work with, actually a majority of them, have efforts out in the field. And what they're doing is they're sending those recruiting efforts to universities. So this was a really interesting thing that I found is that when they do that, they're going to very prestigious universities. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's an interesting thing when you're talking about inclusion and diversity in general. So I went on websites for Stanford, Columbia, NYU, a number of like Ivy League and prestigious colleges around the country, and I looked at what their diversity rates were. Not only for their incoming 2019 and 2020 classes, but also for their engineering programs. A lot of job descriptions these days, especially when it comes to test as well as engineering, look for that CS degree. So if you're thinking about recruiting efforts at universities from the top, you're looking at already a pretty biased dynamic, right? So you're looking at probably around 57% male and 43% women, right? Those are kind of the numbers that kept coming up. Around 57, 56 with men. So pretty even spread. But then when you get to the CS degree, that gets incredibly interesting because then those numbers, especially for women, drop. Something I haven't talked about yet also is the complexity of diversity. So within these genders, what races are being represented in these environments? And you get on this graph and you see that only 15% of Latino, 14% of African American, 4% of Native American and other are being represented at these universities. So when you're thinking about your workplaces and your efforts are at universities and recruiting, chances are you're already diving down pretty low when it comes to diversity in the first place. But of course your aim is to hire people from very prestigious backgrounds so that they can be an add to the team, not recognizing that these experiences are likely coming from other places, not just academics. So someone touched on this earlier, and I apologize, I forgot because I was taking notes just out of control. But in a system, this is from liminal thinking. In a system, if you are part of the system, you are part of the problem. So when we're in our culture at work, and we are, in our lovely groups and we're working alongside each other, and we see that there's a diversity issue within our workplace, we always like to place it on the opposite party. Like, ooh, we don't have enough women. Men, we need to hire more women. The reality is that we are part of the problem as well. And that comes to the area of education. Educating ourselves, educating each other, and being very transparent about what we are working with in the workplace as far as numbers and demographics are concerned. So going back again to what Jess said about the drinking culture, how are we advertising for hire? Has anyone written a job description recently? Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to expound on what they've asked for?
Continuous learning.
Pardon?
Continuous learning.
Continuous learning, okay.
Excited, innovative, I think I use those words.
Excited, innovative. Anyone else?
Inclusion of perks.
Perks, okay.
Rockstar.
Rockstar, high performer. Anything else?
Team player.
Team player. Deadline oriented.
Dog lovers.
Sorry? Dog lovers. Yeah. Got puppies at work over at Huge, I know that.
But also that list that most of our recruiting or work requires us is like degrees you're supposed to have, and years of service, and education, and things like, and the actual hard skills which you're kind of expected to have. So
Right.
there might be a paragraph of these types of work, but then you also have a list of expectations.
Definitely. So there's the list of expectations, the job description itself, like what they're going to be doing, qualities that you expect from the people whom are applying. These things pretty much define the culture of the job you're about to enter into. So I did a little bit of research on a number of you who are in this room today, mostly not you, but your companies. And I read the job descriptions that you have for engineers as well as for testers. Very interesting data. People like to use very gendered language when it comes to job descriptions. That's a difficult thing, especially as a female candidate, to be able to stomach. They are pronoun specific, using he or his, and they aim towards males, usually with the perks. Golf, drinking, football, basketball. Anna talked about how she's not about the sports. I know a number of men who aren't about sports either, but for some reason these are highlights that people have in their job descriptions as perks for working with them. You're cutting out a large dynamic, especially in gender, when you are pronoun specific as well as completely blindsided by the fact that women look at this and they don't find it very attractive. Not all, but some. In addition to that, job descriptions or qualities or necessities for applying for the position. I looked up one particular job description. I don't think anyone here works there, so I'll just, actually I won't mention it. They had 103 descriptors that were necessary to work for this job as an engineer. 103. So statistics show that women are less likely to apply for a job if they do not meet every single one of those descriptions. That's 103. Your opportunity to hire a woman in that case is probably very low. Men, on the other hand, are more but more potential driven. They feel like they can fulfill all of those 103. Quite honestly, I don't think anyone can, but that's pretty much what they're aiming for. So you're going to get a lot of men applying for this position already making your data biased when it comes to people who enter the gates for the interview process in general. So these languages are absolutely skewing our outcome when it comes to hiring. Another thing that's really interesting is diversity in general. I know personally it's uncomfortable working in environments where I don't see myself. And that has been one of the highlights for this opportunity that I have to speak here as well as everywhere else. Black women are the least represented dynamic in engineering. That's hard. When I go to a business and I'm excited to work for them, when I don't see any other black people, it becomes very difficult for me to be excited about the job. It's not because there aren't brown faces around me, but it's because of that aspect of familiarity. Retention rates. You might get people through the door, but keeping them there relies a lot on the culture that you've built around the environment in order for people to feel a part of that process. So we're going to get a little bit into the interview. Has anyone conducted an interview recently? Awesome. Anyone want to provide some words on that? How was the experience?
Very structured.
Structured?
My job, we do EI interviews, and that's standard across the board for every applicant. They give you the same set of 3 questions that you really can't deviate from. So
Okay. So you have a standard regardless of who walks in the door?
yes,
Okay.
Same question, and they answer the same way, and it's in form after each EI. But that's not the job, that's just for the regular.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? Angie?
I just switched up my interview process a little bit recently because I found that I was taking up most of the interview with questions for the candidate and then leaving 5 or 10 minutes for them to ask questions where it should very much so be a mutual type of discussion, and I want them to make sure that they feel like they fit into the environment as well. And so now I'm starting to do kind of a half and half type of thing where I'll do half of it, but allow them to ask questions and drive the discussion as well.
Sure.
And I can also ask some questions within their communication. So as they're talking, I can still kind of get a feel of what I need to know as the interviewer.
Right. Awesome. Anyone else want to share?
So a while back, because I found getting specific answers to specific questions less helpful, I started hearing part of the questioning toward, like, I think that term nowadays, it's called the emotional IQ. That
Emotional IQ.
empathetic, self-awareness, things like that. Just
Right.
tell me about your failures. A lot of people are terrible at that.
Mhm.
And it's telling you something that they don't even aware when they're failing.
Right.
You interviewed me.
Yes. They never ask.
Did he get the job? No? No? Anyone else want to share? Okay, well, that's all. And the interview process is a really interesting place to meet the talent that you've now recruited into the doors. So I read an article recently that talks about the people that we actually are giving to the interview candidacy. So, as I showed earlier, there's this upside down pyramid that kind of starts at the top from recruiting and then goes down into interviews. The people who are actually getting in the building to interview, our chances are very monochromatic, not only in experience, but in their education, in their job descriptors, in their personalities, in their appearance, and in their gender. And this is something that doesn't necessarily happen by accident. It happens unconsciously, so it'd be bias or unconscious bias. But it's something that happens when we're not making efforts to see who's actually walking in the door for interviews. One of the things that this article pointed out was that if you have people in multiples that you're interviewing, in other words, if you have more than one woman on the candidate pool, chances are that woman, one of the two or more, have an opportunity of getting hired. The same thing happens at a rate of 193.72 times more possible for a person of color or a minority to be hired if there's more than one applying at the same time or interviewing at the same time. This is interesting data because there's a cultural aspect to interviewing, saying at least those who are more aimed towards getting diverse employees, that if you have at least one candidate who fits that descriptor, be it gender or race, that the likelihood of them getting hired is going to be high. They did their effort, they got one, they found it, and they're like, okay, perfect, that's an equal opportunity. And then they play that game of interviewing all the candidates at once. If there aren't multiples, the likelihood of any of them, be it gender or race, is not getting hired at the end of the day. So it's things to think about when you're looking at an interview pool altogether. Are you really opening the doors for people of color, for people of different culture, race, gender, to be able to come in and actually interview, increasing their opportunity to work in that culture and environment? So then the nature of your culture in general is the people. After working with certain clients and just really evaluating what was going on in their organization, the reality of it is that culture is not a thing, it's the people, right? So this is the question where we stand. If we're supporting a culture by way of job descriptions and the way that it exists now, how are we opening up for change, right? So we have the idea that the culture is the people who exist currently. If we are aiming to increase our numbers in gender for women or for people of color, minorities, how do we appeal to them with that culture? It's a culmination of all these things. We have to really be specific about who we're attracting in the doors and how we're approaching that process. In other words, we have to be intentional. And this is something that raises arguments in a lot of organizations. They wonder, if I'm specifically aiming towards women, is that discriminating towards men? Or if I'm specifically aiming towards people of color, is that taking away opportunities from those who are Caucasian or white? The answer is questionable. It's very complex, but the reality is you're not going to get those people in the door if you do not specifically angle your efforts towards getting them there. So going back to that college example in the beginning, we talked about how we're recruiting at these Ivy League schools. What's the matter with community colleges? You're going to find that people who might not have the expenses to go to these Ivy Leagues are going to be more in attendance at these job fairs that are a result of going to these recruiting efforts. What about those who didn't graduate college or didn't attend altogether? as a tester, I know that I didn't study for this, and I think that that's kind of known in my bio, but somehow I ended up here. And I think a lot of testers have, at least in the experience that I've had speaking with them and working with awesome testers, they have not gone to school for this either. But their skill set, at least in the hard skills and a collection of the soft skills, have landed them in this profession. So attracting the right talent requires being intentional. That is pretty much all that I have as far as the culture is concerned, or what I'm presenting today. So just think about it when you are going into your next interview about being open-minded. And considering all of these points, are you attracting the right people? Is the language around your culture inclusive? Is the language specific to a gender or a particular type? Are we available to people who don't have the same interests as us? And what are we really asking for when we're saying cultural fit in these situations?